Hello there. As you may know, EU energy ministers reached agreement yesterday on the Clean Energy Package. This is the big legislation that will define much of what the EU does on energy up to 2030. Now, the European Commission tabled the legislation this time last year, but it's got to be agreed by the member states of the EU and by the European Parliament. The European Parliament is close to agreeing most of their positions on the legislation. What happened yesterday was that the member states agreed their positions on all of the legislation. So it was a big moment. Now, of course, the member states will have to align with the European Parliament next year. So it's still a few months until we know what the final legislation will say. But it's a good time now to take stock of how things are shaping up. So what are the big issues? First of all, the EU's renewable target for 2030. Now, the European Commission proposed that it should be 27% of final energy consumption. For now, a clear majority of the member states think 27% is high enough. But the Parliament want 35%. So this is going to be a big issue next year in the negotiations between the member states and the Parliament. Let's see where it comes out. There's a chance that we might end up with a target of 30%. Now, what will this EU target mean for individual countries? As you know, today in Europe, every country has a binding national target for renewables for 2020. But for 2030, they won't. Instead, the EU has somehow got to find a way of ensuring that all the countries contribute to what will be a binding collective target without the EU being able to force any country to make that contribution. The European Parliament say, well, let's have national benchmarks, so there's political pressure on member states to do the right thing. Member states don't like that. The Parliament say, well, let's at least have a steady linear expansion of renewables up to 2030. Member states don't really like that, but they did agree yesterday that there should be 3 interim targets between now and 2030 towards whatever the 2030 EU target ends up being. Now, these so-called governance rules of the package may end up being a little bit weaker than we might have hoped this time last year, but the package will impose lots of new things on national governments which will have a positive impact on renewables markets in Europe. First of all, every government will be obliged to write a national energy plan in which they will have to set out what their plans are for new renewable installations every year, and also what their plans are for existing renewables that are coming to the end of their normal operational life between now and 2030. At the same time, every government in Europe will have to give us, the industry, 3 years visibility at any moment in time of how they are going to support renewables investments. So if it's auctions, they've got to tell us at least 3 years in advance when those auctions are taking place, how much capacity is being auctioned. That's good. It's more clarity than we've had before. And there are 2 other good things on auctions and support schemes. First of all, countries will be free to run technology-specific auctions and support schemes. And secondly, it'll be much harder for governments to make changes retroactively to their support schemes and other renewables policies. Also, every government in Europe is going to be obliged under the package to remove all regulatory barriers to corporate renewable PPAs and to facilitate the uptake of PPAs. That's good for us, of course, and there will be new rules on guarantees of origin. Now, an important element of the Clean Energy Package is electricity market design. Here, the European Parliament hasn't yet agreed what its position is on the Commission proposals. So it's slightly more difficult to say what the final rules are going to look like. But we do know the following. First, renewables will have full and equal access to balancing and other ancillary service markets. At the same time, we will have to take on balancing responsibilities. Of course, we need to get the sequencing of those two things exactly right. Second, priority dispatch, priority access. It will remain in place as it is today for all existing renewables in Europe. But for new renewables from 2020, it'll be replaced by a system of curtailment and compensation for renewables when they get curtailed because there's too much electricity being generated. Third, capacity payments that many governments make to conventional power plants to stay online. The rules around these will become stricter. There'll have to be real supply concerns. And capacity payments to coal plants will be phased out over time. What's unclear on capacity payments is how far they will have to take account of available capacity in other countries. That's to play for next year. So there we are. As you can see, there's still a lot to fight for a higher renewables target, for more pressure on member states to meet it, for the right rules on market design. And even if we get those things right, let's not forget the clean energy package, important though it is not the answer to every challenge we face in the wind industry in Europe today. It will not do much, for example, to advance the electrification of heating and transport that is so important to us. And of course, we mustn't forget those national energy plans. The national governments will be writing them next year. We need to be influencing the content, so there are good, ambitious things in there on renewables. So a lot still to play for. Thank you very much indeed for all the support you've given us on the lobbying on the package so far. Keep it up in 2018. Thank you.